Oh. Hey, hi everybody. Thanks for making it to our new meeting room. The maintenance center was booked this evening, so hopefully we have a couple folks who find their way here. But thanks for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Matt. There are like 7 screens around the room that you can direct your attention to whichever one is easiest for you to see. And this one rolls. So if we want to move it a little closer, or if it's okay right there, let me know. Otherwise, it should be hopefully as usual tonight.
Clicker?
There's not a clicker. I have the PowerPoint on my computer, so you just tell me when you want to advance.
All right. So the first one, there we go. So agenda for this evening. Welcome, and I don't know, do we need to actually do introductions?
Does everyone remember?
We all remember each other pretty much, and we've got our name tags, so we're probably good. Okay, so just welcome, which we've done. We have a public comment period at the front, and if there's anybody who's not on the committee who's here and
haven't heard from anybody.
So that one will go really fast. And then we'll give you, just as we usually do, an update on where we are and what we've been doing since we last met. And then the bulk of the agenda is to talk about the capital improvement project list. So we'll get into the details of that when we get there. We'll spend some time related to that, talking about and doing a little like kind of, not exactly polling, but a ranking or a prioritization exercise with y'all related to the criteria that we will use as a team to come up with initial prioritization rankings for the project. So we'll talk about that more when we get to that point in the project, but we're going to ask you to give us your, tell us what you consider to be the most important of these different criteria that we're looking at using. And then we'll just do a quick wrap up and next step. So that's the agenda. Does that sound okay? Any questions about that? Perfect. Okay. So next one.
Please bear with me while I figure out this new stuff.
All right. So this is kind of our typical project schedule overview slide. Just kind of shows where we are in the process. It's kind of showing us like into the project implementation and plan document stage. We are still kind of finishing up some of the pieces that feed into the plan itself. So, for example, the CIP that we're going to talk about today, we're finishing up work estimating costs associated with all those projects. I'll talk about that a little bit more later when we get there. We're finishing that up, and then we're also working on, with another team member, the system development charge methodology update, and then just some of the we'll be describing sort of other funding strategies, and then all of that work, and then all the work that's come before this will get fed into putting together the actual Parks Plan 2040. So that's kind of our next task, is to finish up some of those remaining pieces of the planning document and then start to assemble the planning document. So that's where we are. In terms of the next one, I don't want to kind of show what's coming up next. Here's like, yeah, the community one. Yeah. So this is not too bad a one to sort of talk about also what's coming up next in terms of remaining meetings with you all. So we are expecting to meet with you all again in December. And at that point, we expect to have for you perhaps not a draft of the entire plan, the entire Parks Plan 2040, but we'll call it an annotated outline of that plan, a set of proposed prioritized CIP recommendations or project recommendations for you to review, and look at least a portion of the plan so you see what the document's going to look like in terms of its format and layout and that kind of thing. So that's what we would present to you when we next meet. And then we expect to have a briefing with the city council in approximately January, and give them the same kind of update. Here's where we are, here's what we've got, get them to weigh in. and then finish putting together the draft plan during that time. Probably by the time we get to January, we've pretty much got most of it done as a draft, and then come back and have a joint meeting, or is our current plan, is a joint meeting with this group and the Parks Board. So for once, Parks Board members won't have to come to two, come to one, to present the, basically a complete draft plan where the proposal would be, or the goal would be to have the group recommend taking that into the adoption process. The systems development charge methodology update goes through its own, it's got to go through a separate or its own adoption process, and that typically happens after the plan is adopted, because the systems development charge methodology is referencing the capital improvement project list that's in the plan. So that kind of happens as a separate action item by the council. So we would expect to then be taking a plan to council for adoption in kind of probably about March, April of next year. And then we're kind of on the, we're on the like sort of home stretch of the planning process. We've really done a lot of the work, and the CIP is sort of the culmination of a lot of the work we've been doing. We'll talk about sort of sources of information that went into that. We talked about that a little bit last time. Yeah. So that's our update in terms of where we are in the project. Any questions about any of that?
I think also in December, we'll be sharing our kind of implementation and action plan strategies,
yes,
along with the prioritized project list. Here's all these projects, here's how much it all costs, and here's how we would anticipate approaching like a funding strategy. So,
yeah. So you'll kind of get like the remaining pieces of the plan, plus a look at what the plan is going to look like. Generally, be able to weigh in on that, because then the next step again is really kind of finishing putting it all into a single document without a lot of content changes with that. So, other than what we presented and talked to you about. So yeah. All right. So just one more sort of piece in terms of recap on what we talked about last time and kind of where we are with that. So the last time we focused on the system-wide recommendations document. We got a lot of good comments from y'all. We then also presented that information to the Parks Board and got additional comments and suggestions from them. We're in the process of updating that document. And so that'll be another piece that goes into the park plan itself. We may look at some sort of reorganizing of those system-wide recommendations, not really like changing the content of them beyond necessarily, you know, what we talked to you in the Parks Board about, but just organizing them in some different buckets. We still need to have a conversation with staff about, do we need to do that? Do we want to do that? Is there some different way to kind of organize them that makes more sense in terms of how the city monitors implementation and tracks completion of, where they are things that are completed and are just routine, but of those system-wide recommendations. So we've been updating them based on the comments from you all on the Parks Board, and we maybe do some further updating in the form of, again, kind of reorganizing, or if we find any more things that are like, oh, we said this 3 times in this document, we don't really need to say it 3 times. We need to say it once. If we find duplication, we tried to do that last time. We kind of reorganized it, but if we find some more of that, we'll address that as well. So that's kind of where we are with that piece. And then, of course, since then, we've been working on this capital improvement plan, which is in a giant spreadsheet. So what we sent you was kind of a set of PDFs that represents the information from the spreadsheet, and the thing that's going into the spreadsheet now is all the cost information. So that's what we've been hard at work on since we last saw you, and we've got a fair bit of this kind of not back and forth, but sort of back and forth with our team and staff, just to make sure we get all the right projects in there, and talking about cost assumptions and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we've been doing over the last few weeks, the last 5 years.
And I did have one person request an Excel copy of that spreadsheet. If anyone is interested, if that makes it easier for you guys to go through the project, just let me know. I know that the PDF is a little.
Yeah. All right. Any questions about that? Keep going. Sounds like questions. I think we presented some of this. Does this slide look familiar to folks? Because yeah, because, well, of course it looks familiar to here at the park board meeting. But the last round of meetings we had, there was some stuff we didn't get time to present to the park board, but I think there were things that we presented for you. So these next couple of slides are going to be a little bit of a recap. So just bear with me. Hopefully that's not too bad a thing to get a little recap on kind of the methodology and or let's call it the approach associated with the capital improvement plan. So I think this and the next couple of slides you will probably see before, and if you're on the park board, you will have seen it twice before. So sorry about that. So this is just sort of a summary of the sources of information that went into the CIP list. So I won't necessarily kind of cover them in order, but I'll note that a lot of these projects came from existing plans of one sort or another that the city is already prepared, adopted, is moving forward and implementing in a number of cases. So the Lusher area master plan, that's a pretty big one. And we talked about a number of the projects that came out of that one when we went to the Parks Board last week. That is a Lusher area master plan. So it actually includes projects that are not just at the farm, but also in the surrounding area. So that's sort of an important thing to know. And that was a plan that was prepared, had a lot of public review, adopted by the city, move forward. So that's where a bunch of projects are coming from, or at least some of them. And then there are other plans for specific facilities that are similar in nature, in some ways to that, so they were sort of conceptual or master plans for facilities that identified individual improvements to those facilities. So there's a bunch of projects that came from plans like that. And then there's other plans that were more system-wide plans. So the city's ADA transition plan identifies a variety of improvements at a very specific and detailed level in parks throughout the city. So you'll see projects that are coming from that plan. There's a natural, you should actually read it because I always forget the name of it.
The natural areas habitat management.
There we go. Yeah, I always lose a couple words or get a couple of, but that's another one that has projects sort of throughout the community, a number of which ended up in this project. So there's those planning documents that we looked at, and that identify specific projects that we want to make sure are reflected in Park Plan 2040 if they have not yet, been completed. And then there's all the community outreach activities that we conducted. So the initial public meeting, when we kind of a couple months into the project, the workshops we had this past summer, the focus group meetings we had with specific community groups, of course, all the meetings with this group, meetings with Parks Board, meetings with staff. So kind of all of those meetings and activities have generated projects that have ended up in the capital improvement project. But what have I surveys, thank you. And then the surveys that we conducted. Yeah. So kind of basically community engagement, community meetings, and existing plans, and then just kind of as part of those and the needs assessment document that we prepared, some of which is sort of talking about general types of needs and trends in development of recreational facilities. So there's some things that came in from that too, and often many of which were kind of repeated in community meetings or discussions with y'all or with the park board. So there's a lot of like reinforcing influence here, right? A lot of these things are sort of came from one place, but they're reinforced through other activities and needs. So that's sort of the source of things. Next slide. So kind of the way we have structured the project in the CIP, we've categorized them into these 4 categories. So reinvestment, that's really in large part sort of maintaining what you have. So improving things that need to be improved, replacing things kind of, let's say, sort of in kind at least, or at least not in a way that's like adding capacity or adding new facilities. But really kind of reinvesting in the we already have. Building or adding, so that could be, in most cases, is not necessarily building a whole new facility or a whole new park. There are some instances of that in here, but a lot of it is really about adding amenities or facilities to existing parks or existing recreational facilities or existing areas where there are trails or those types of things. So there's a fair number of projects that are sort of that nature. And then there are a couple that are more about building, there's one project that's building a new park in a specific area. There are several projects, which I'll talk about more specifically here, that aren't tied to a specific location, but are about building a new thing somewhere. And again, we've got some slides that sort of summarize those. And then access, improving access within or to parks. So both within parks, but also from neighborhoods to parks, or between parks. So that's a big, that's a category of things. And then the is projects that enhance natural areas or provide opportunities to connect with nature. Now, I will note that I think when we get to, you'll see, and when we get to one of these upcoming slides, that there's not a lot of projects in that category, but there are actually probably, or there are for sure, more projects that address that need than you'll see in that category, because they're meeting multiple benefits, and we categorize them as something else sometimes, but they actually are also enhancing either access to nature or natural areas. So hopefully the numbers won't be or feel too misleading in that regard. So those are the types of projects. There's 124 total projects identified for implementation in the near, midterm, and the long term. And so that's what I'll say about that one. So this table summarizes the number of projects within different types of facilities, and then in those 4 categories that I just talked about. So on the left, you see different categories or classifications of facilities, and those are just ordered the way those facility types are ordered in our inventory. So we have, an inventory that we produced early in this project that just says the city has these following different types of facilities, and where they're parks, they're kind of ordered from largest to smallest. This question came up in the park board meeting, like, why are they in this order? And so the park facilities are largest to smallest, and then the others are just the order they're in the inventory.
They're not prioritized.
They're not meant to be prioritized. Like, it's not meant to be most important from top to bottom. This is, I will not call it a random organization, but we'll call it a semi-random ordering of things, from top to bottom. And then across, the columns then are those 4 different types of projects that I mentioned in the last slide, and then you'll see the number of projects that fall into different categories. And again, you'll kind of see in the nature column, 1. So again, I would say that's a little misleading, because I think that if you kind of pour through the actual CIP list, you'll see other projects that do enhance access to nature or natural areas. And then we'll also, I think, there are some things that are more like programmatic in nature that you saw, for instance, in the system-wide recommendations that are about meeting that same goal, but they're things you're doing throughout your system, as opposed to you're just doing this in this one place kind of project. So I did want to note that, because somebody, I think, thought that, or maybe we just brought it up at the first.
I think I brought it up because I think one of the reasons we have these 4 categories, reinvestment, one thing that we've heard throughout this process is take care of what you already have, take care of what you already have. Like, we hear that all the time from our community members. So we want to show, like, these are all these projects that are doing that. And, we do hear a lot about access, and we also hear a lot about providing people access to nature. But when I sat down with this project list and I went through it with our staff who are taking care of these natural areas, their feedback was kind of, well, this isn't like a one-time capital investment. This is something that has to be handled on an ongoing basis, and it's like years and years of work that happen consistently, not like a project where you build it and then you're done. So that's why a lot of those things that are still happening don't really show up in the capital projects category. But I don't want it to be misleading to say we're not taking care of our natural areas, because we are, just through sort of a different approach. And then also we have 23 projects that are identified in natural areas. And I think all of those also sort of fall into the nature category, but a lot of them are like trail improvements, like reducing erosion on existing trails in natural areas or something like that. So those kind of fall both into the access and nature bucket. But anyway.
So we put them more directly into the access bucket. So, yeah. All right. I think I have one or two more of these summary slides, and we'll pause and take questions and comments on really all of the CIP stuff. But all right. So this is we have a couple of maps that summarize sort of geographic distribution of projects. So we use the same kind of geographic breakdown or sub areas within the city that we used when we went out and did our meetings this past summer to organize these. And so we wanted to get a sense of like, how are these projects allocated or spread across the city? Are we doing a relatively, even or equitable job of that? And so you can kind of get a sense of the breakdown here. Now, recognizing that some of these areas may have a different number of parks, and may have a different size population, but they give you at least some sense of how things are allocated. And kind of what you see up here is that we've got, somewhere between sort of 25 and 35 projects in each of these geographic areas. So they are kind of spread out across the city in different parts and in each quadrant of the community. So I won't say too much more about this one. The next one provides a little bit more information about this, I would say. That's okay. I'm sure they'll catch it up. There we go. This one is sort of showing some similar information, but not by like and just a list with the number. This is showing the different projects by type using those icons. So same four categories I talked about before: reinvestment, build, add, access, and nature. And the little icons, the location is not where the little icon is. The location is in the park or the natural area or the recreation facility nearest to the icons. We just had to put them somewhere and not like totally cover up every park with icons. So that's how we did it. So, but this gives you a sense of, what types of projects are recommended in what locations or in what specific facilities across the city. So that kind of shows you that. And all this stuff, you should have, I think, did we send this out in advance of the thing? I don't know if we did.
We didn't send the map out,
the
but
map
this
out.
represents the bulk of the projects that are in your mega spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Everything except places where we didn't identify a location specifically, of which there were a handful, and then also ones where there were like system-wide, like drinking fountain replacements everywhere. Those are not shown on this map because that's across the board.
And I mean, so yeah, this does reflect what's in the inventory, and we'll get to see as a follow-up too, just so you can see the map. Spend more time than we're going to take right now looking at the map, if you want to pour over it and really want to do that. So, but that gives you a sense again, sort of the distribution of different types of projects. The next one, now I think I got a couple more where I'm just going to talk about some specific projects where we didn't identify a location for these projects, and where to some degree they're sort of larger scale, somewhat larger, I'll say medium to larger scale projects in terms of sort of the extent of the cost of the project. So, sorry, I'm putting my glasses on. Also, sorry about my weird eye. Yeah, maybe you can't see it, but it's very red. So I got a shot in the eye yesterday. This was the effect. Doesn't hurt though. Don't worry. Doesn't affect. In my vision, I actually just don't need the glasses for like this distance, right? So when I have the glasses on, I'm not looking through exactly the right spot, and my progressive lenses not actually read this text very well. It's better to take off the glasses. So no, it's all good. So and it's a little hard to read it there. So I'll just sort of walk through these fairly quickly to talk about them. And I'll also mention some things that people asked about at the park board, if I can remember them. And Spiro or Jess will chime in if I forget them. So one is is a new neighborhood park, and it's talking about acquisition, design, development of a new neighborhood park to serve the Southwest Lake Oswego and the Lake Grove, Bryant, or Rosewood neighborhood. So that was particularly a gap area where we said we think there needs to be an additional park in this area, given that gap area analysis that we did earlier. Outdoor pickleball court. So as a lot of conversation in this community over the last few years around pickleball, and the city council liaison for the park board reminded us at our meeting last week that this is a priority for the city council to address the issue, the need, desire for pickleball courts in this community. And so we have not identified a specific location. I'll say that for sort of all of these things, there is going to need to be some further public process to identify a location. So and that's really kind of goes beyond the scope of this larger system plan. So there's a number of things here where we said there is a need for this thing, and there's going to need to be more community review and discussion and analysis about where each of these things might occur. And so, but pickleball courts is one of the things that's important. And one of the questions was, well, what about indoor pickleball courts? And I think the response is sort of twofold. One, the city could choose to, pursue construction of indoor pickleball courts as well, but there has been sort of a strong desire and sentiment from the kind of pickleball playing community that having outdoor courts where they also get access to natural airflow and things like that is important to them. And so that's why this says here outdoor pickleball courts. So
there will be 3 courts in the new recreation and aquatics in the gym.
Yeah, there's already
indoor courts
in the gym.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah, so there's that's getting partly met there, but there's not a project, in the works to build outdoor or create outdoor.
So do they play pickleball outdoors all year?
So they do if the areas are covered, and that could be part of this facility. It could be that this facility would have a roof structure over it, but be at least semi-open to the air around it, although it might still have also some noise attenuation to impact or reduce the impact of the noise. But
or if you get a dry day, like today. I mean, when the courts were open, we saw people playing in the winter, just not when it was like actively pouring rain, but it's just kind of like how things are working at the skate park over on Stafford right now. I mean, people aren't out there if it's pouring, but if it dries up and it's dry for a few hours and the water kind of dissipates, then you see people out there taking advantage of that.
The same with tennis for folks who play tennis. I used to play tennis. My dad was around like once a week, but not when it was totally wet. Sometimes we would actually go to an indoor facility and play indoors, and that was very maybe kind of this underneath. So that's one. Water play feature, there was a lot of community discussion and desire for a water play feature, but we didn't identify a specific location. That's a sort of a higher price tag kind of facility, and so we hesitated to decide, okay, exactly where that is, or if it's more than one. But there's definitely that desire and that being identified.
Is that something that we could wrap into some of the playground renovations? Because
it's possible. It requires a lot of underground infrastructure, as you can imagine. So I think that's why we didn't want to pin it to a specific site right now, but if we're looking at a park that has, you know, well, we're gonna be replacing the playground anyway, we could use that as kind of an opportunity to say, well, hey, what if we did a smaller structure and also
Right.
splash pad as part of that? So that's
Yeah.
definitely possible. Actually, that's a good note you could put in there, that it could be explored as part of a playground replacement project.
Bergen City has one in front of their library, which gets used all.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is,
I think, does it Beaverton also?
it's like the Wellington Hills Library or something. They
Okay.
have one.
Does
Yeah.
that one in, like, at the lower part of the plaza, does that count?
We have heard that it does not count.
Someone else, but maybe debate, right?
It's a fountain, but it's not a splash pad. You can't, like a lot of the newer splash pads, the kids can like push a button to make it go and then play in it, and it's more like intended for children to play in. I think.
That's what I can tell.
That's an adult splash. Also immediately adjacent to a highway. Also not the best place for kids to do.
Couple really good ones. I was on the East Coast this summer in New York, and I did a lot of walking along both the Hudson River and the East River. And man, the like number of new
Right.
park and green space areas, those locations is incredible. And I saw a couple really cool splash pads just over there.
If anyone has ever in Bend, go to Alpenglow Park and check out their splash pad. It's very cool.
So that's one, and then sand volleyball court, you know, somewhat similar. This is something we heard a desire and need for, but we did not identify a specific location for that. But it's another one that's in here and would require some more analysis to decide, okay, what's the best location for this. And then the last one, the West Side Indoor Community Recreation Center. I was just curious to say a little bit more about this one, more about this conversation.
Yeah, I think folks have probably heard conversations and about wanting some sort of recreation, indoor recreation opportunities on the west side of Lake Oswego. We as parks know we need a home for our indoor teen center, which is currently being operated out of the Christchurch Parish. And we also know that there is demand for library services in that area. So there's all these things that lead us to say, okay, well, maybe we need to think about something that's like indoor, providing that space for people on the west side. So we don't have a location identified, but this is a project that would probably be a collaboration with multiple departments.
Just to piggyback on that, is that still sort of, they're looking at the Lake Grove Elementary School as a possible site for the library?
I'm not sure. I know the school district was doing their own analysis of, they're working on their strategic plan or long range plan. They're kind of doing their own planning right now. So it's kind of up to them. But I mean, something that's the right geographic area. Somewhere in that area is where we're looking, where we've heard a lot of demand. It kind of serves that same place, that same area that we're talking about adding a new neighborhood park, and those could even be co-located as that sort of Lake Grove, Bryan, or Rosewood area.
Thank you.
All right, and I got one more of these slides, and we'll take a pause and hear from you about, you know, what do you think about all this? So this is kind of the last one. This is a set of proposed system-wide improvements. So these are things that would happen kind of throughout the system. They also, you know, don't include a specific one or more specific locations if they be happening in multiple locations. So one is neighborhood trail connections. So this is really about, again, improving, creating better access from neighborhoods to trails. So this could be sidewalk improvements, it could be actual off-street trails to get people to parks, et cetera. This is obviously going to require coordination with the city's transportation department and coordination with the city's other transportation plans. So like Oswego, like other cities, has a transportation system plan that identifies improvements to the pedestrian and bicycle system, as well as for vehicles. And so, and then there are things like safe routes to park Express the schools program, so there's a fair bit of coordination needed to implement that. But it has been sort of throughout this process, kind of a high priority for folks is like, we need to have better ways to get to parks that are within or near, within our neighborhoods or near where we live. So that's one that's important. And then there's system-wide drinking fountain replacement. So that's just kind of throughout the city. There's places where drinking fountains need to be replaced. And with newer models and ones that are meet accessibility requirements. System-wide signage manual implementation. So this refers in part to a specific document the city prepared that identifies recommendations for improvement to signs throughout the city, including the park system. So it's kind of implementing those recommendations, making sure signage that's outdated is kind of brought up to current standards. And there were a number of questions about this one at the Parks Board that sort of related to, does this include, for instance, creating signs in multiple languages, include creating signs that are readable or accessible to people with sight or other disabilities. And so I think sort of the general answer is yes, but there's some details, in that signage manual that I don't have enough information about to say too much more about that. And there's also been recommendations like from the city's DEI committee that overlap or relate to this. There's recommendations, there's system-wide. In our system-wide recommendations, there's some recommendations around signing that I think are going to relate to and inform implementation of this system-wide project. So kind of a lot that potentially goes into this one, but and maybe I'll leave it at that.
I think part of it is just making our signage consistent across our system, so people know when they go to a park, they recognize it. We've got our big monument sign out there. They see the rules that are stated clearly, and then adding some signage that we don't have a lot of in our system right now, like trailhead markers and even like trail length markers and things like that. So just doing a better job of providing information to people while they're there in the parks, which we have heard a lot about. So.
Yeah, using more symbology rather than words, it's understandable, hopefully, to kind of a broader range of folks. Yeah, there's lots of there's been a fair bit of discussion about this, in these meetings and in some of our other documents. And then the last one on here is system-wide bollard replacement. So that's just again across the system, replacing bollards that are old, not up to standard, etc. So, and again, that's sort of throughout the system, not in just one place or another.
What are bollards?
Bollards are sort of those things that come out of the ground and they're generally preventing a vehicle from entering a trail, or they're preventing a vehicle from getting into a place that's designed for pedestrians. So that's fair.
Have you ever walked around in Lusher on that asphalt path around Lusher Farm?
No,
Paved path?
no, no.
They don't always have to be, kind of keeping vehicles out. Sometimes they'll have lighting in them, but they're sort of
It's like a short pole.
the short
Yeah.
pole. I gotta say, when you're out, man, I got really slammed my leg into some bollards in Spain once because there were just too many people around there and they were too low to the ground. And some can come up and down. When you're out there walking around in urban areas, especially, watch for the bollards, man. They'll
Oh,
hit you.
wow.
Yeah.
Part of the reason we're replacing ours is to make sure that they're all highly visible and appropriately striped and have the high-vis tape on them.
Yeah. Get people like me who aren't paying attention. That's a bad chin bruises. Bollards.
Yeah, with the country, I'll give yourself a break.
Yeah, Madrid or Barcelona. Anyway, so this is where I'll take a pause. Really, the next slide says what questions do you have or comments. And so I'll say a couple things here before I stop talking for me in just a moment. First, we sent you these PDFs with these long lists of projects, and hopefully you had a chance to look at those. But I don't expect you to have necessarily read through that 124 project list. So if you didn't have a chance to do that before today's meeting and you have additional comments or questions after this meeting, we're always question today. There's a couple questions related to these, like, are there any, when you look at this list, and there were some comments on this, are there any projects where you're like, I don't think that should be in here, or I have concerns about that, why is that in here? So we had some conversation around some of those projects, including it, I will note it, Lesher Farms, or that came out of the Lesher Farms master plan with the park board. So that's one question, you know, is there anything missing? I think if people identified at least a couple of things that like were not in here, that, oh yeah, that should be identified somewhere. And yeah, or are there any other comments about any specific projects in the CIP list? And then after we have that conversation, we'll talk about the evaluation criteria. Now I'll stop.
How many folks did you hear a desire for sand volleyball from?
How many folks? That's a good question.
I can think of at least two, but mostly coming from one meeting, so I would say it hasn't been the most.
Yeah,
Popular.
Priority.
Probably not from hundreds.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Quite a few youth raised
yeah.
and volleyball, I would say that was very popular.
I was gonna say the volleyball program is like, at least at Lake Richard Middle School, my daughter, there are like probably 15 teams. Just give you an idea of the women, a little younger, and we're talking about later, like, I think it would be appropriate because it is a really increasing. Yeah, and just to have more outdoor space in general, it's hard, you can't get indoor space, the problem. Like there's like, I tried to start a 4th and 5th grade volleyball and I couldn't, it was hard to get space. Yeah, just my, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think you're looking at a different demographic for that. So, in terms of age, probably.
A couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt.
We just, many of this is part of, we discussed at some point, as part of an accessibility discussion, adding lighting on trails, and not like highlighting, but,
Right.
you know, lighting that doesn't, you know, that would be kind of low impact certainly to the nature and the critters that live around, but at least something that would give people the ability to access the parks in the winter time in some of the more, you know, like the trails. Because, and as we're doing, like, there's a lot, I think, like in the canal, Brian, although, I mean, we're talking about putting the trails, if we could add, or at least consider adding some lighting element, like, not like super bright or anything, yeah, but just as part of the whole accessibility, I think that'd be worth considering. And, the other thing is, I know this is expensive, but, and if the school district isn't gonna permit people access to their gyms and their, that kind of. And maybe they will, but I think, and then just a comment about volleyball, and I've heard the same thing with basketball, just that. We don't really have that, we're building
Yes.
a lot, but especially on the west side, as part of that community, you know, that was like an indoor athletic, the gym was something
Gym
short,
space.
yeah. I think there'd be,
Do you think that like smaller rec rooms would meet that same need, or are you thinking like gym?
I'm thinking more like gym, but also even facilities that can facilitate dance, yoga, and, group fitness classes, things like that. I mean, we've got, well, you know what, I mean, part of that's gonna be the LoRac, but I think the LoRac is gonna be a lot of fun for people who live in like Weston. So.
I think we've definitely envisioned like smaller class type rooms as part of that.
Yeah.
I don't think that the conversation today has really talked about like big gymnasium. But I mean, certainly
I don't know if you heard it. I so invent my ear on it. About 3 days.
Yeah, fair enough.
And they say, oh, this has been going on forever. I don't think that's true, but, no, so completely anecdotal, but I mean, it's something that I think if the school district is gonna facilitate that.
And on trail lighting, are you imagining that more in developed parks? I mean, it's typically, if you're running like, hardwired trail lighting, that's pretty challenging to get conduit into
No.
like natural areas, but
No, I was thinking more like there's a trail.
like along like foothills or
in
something,
like
or,
East Beluga that goes from the baseball field through kind of the area.
yep,
Something like that kind of play.
Okay.
There's there's one up in, Avalon, there's a trail that kind of goes through, where there's an actual trail there, not
Yeah.
like and people use it, they just use it in the dark.
Right.
Uh,
which is like very soon gonna be 4 p.m.
Right, yeah.
What about like solar?
There are some,
Yeah.
I think,
I mean, I have some.
there's like ones you can get a cost.
They work really
Yeah.
well, even in the winter.
I mean, and they get knocked over pretty easily too, you want to, it's
Or-
pretty substantial.
Other things that anybody saw that you feel like were missing based on the, conversations we've had up to this point? Yeah. James?
At the beginning of this process, and as part of the park plan 2025, there was a talk of potential transportation support, park to park, and I think especially with Laura,
Yeah.
be kind of helpful. I know with the city, there was talk and modest movement of possible transportation options, and it seemed to go away and maybe, I don't know where it is, but has that been, but when we talk about access, like people, low economic struggles, people with ADA issues, could really benefit from.
We do, I'm fairly sure, talk about that in the system-wide recommendations document, particularly in terms of some kind of enhanced transportation or shuttle for people, particularly to get to the LORAC, to get to larger facilities where there's only one of those facilities in the city, and as you say, it's challenging for people, a lot of different groups to get there, if their kids have a driver's license, their disabilities, whatever it might be, so there's definitely some recommendations in that document about that, and that's more of, I would think of it as more of sort of a service or a program than an actual capital improvement project, and I think that's why you don't see it so much in here. Here, we're really talking about things you build as opposed to things you provide over,
I assume as much, I just want to make sure that.
I
Yeah.
think on the citywide
Yeah, that's good.
scale, we've at various times heard desires for what I'll call like a community circulator system, which is sort of like a very locally focused van or mini bus or something that's like a public transportation option. I don't know where that stands. I don't think it's like come to fruition at any time. But I will say we do have a new bus line that just started, line 153, which it's operated by TriMet and runs between Westland and the transit center that's right up here by Safeway. And so what we are advocating for TriMet to add a stop in front of the Recreation and Aquatic Center so that it would serve that facility, and it would also serve, Rosique and Foster Farm and all of those facilities as well. I think right now the nearest stop is down on like McVeigh and Parish. It's pretty far, but we are hopefully going to get one, hopefully on Overlook.
And this is a question I should probably know the answer to, but does TriMet provide dial-a-ride or on-demand service within Lake Oswego? Because they do have different, their service areas for that sometimes differ from where they provide regularly. As two people know, I saw somebody doing this. Yeah, so I mean that is a potential service for folks in town. It sounds like.
We also have some transportation services that are offered by the Adult Community Center. But I know there have been like a lot of requests to expand that program.
Thank you.
Yeah, good, great question. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Yes. There.
So I was thinking about it, Parksman 2025 talks about, how, because I was thinking about, I'm familiar with the natural areas and how there's not a lot of, CIP projects that are focused on natural areas. And Parksman 2025 talks about prioritizing land acquisition adjacent to, like, or within habitat clusters and adjacent to existing habitat areas. And I was realizing, I don't think that this plan actually talks about it in that way. It talks about the idea of expanding habitat. And I know that the city's more built out than it was 15 years ago, but like, I do feel like in my time on the Parks Board, there have been a number of residents who've come to the Parks Board talking about various potential natural area land acquisition opportunities that are adjacent to an existing natural area, or they feature something of significance like a wetland or something. So I was thinking that that seems like it's missing.
Probably from the like, well, yeah, maybe as a capital project or maybe as a wide
Yeah.
recommendation, like
Recommendation.
strategic land acquisition.
Right.
I think we have something that starts to talk about that, but not in,
You mean
not in the context
exactly
of
in that
next
way.
to natural areas.
Yeah, I was thinking of it in the, from the point of view of like enhancing and expanding our existing natural areas. And that's, you know, really beneficial to the wildlife that lives there. Kind of thinking of it in terms of wildlife corridors and habitat that's livable for the things that live there.
Yep. I know we do hear sometimes from people that they want us to buy land outside the urban growth boundary that's next to like Lusher, for example. And that's something that I think is hard for us to consider doing because like we learned with Lusher, you know, there's very little, we're not supposed to be having public use of properties that are zoned EFU and are outside the urban growth boundary. So I think we would have to make sure we're adding language that is specifying like, you know, within the city or within like a future city growth area.
Right. Right. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the.
Yeah.
of all of
I'm
that,
probably going too far into on that.
but I mean, I do know, I'm wondering like if, because I know that some. I mean, it seems like it'd be a great opportunity for like protecting a wetland there or expanding like oak savanna restoration there. And I don't know if that would be against what the restrictions are in that area. It seems like it would be in line with.
Essentially anything that's outside the urban growth boundary and zoned exclusive farm and forest use, it is not supposed to be having public recreation on that property. So as a public recreation department, it's just sort of until the city kind of expands into those areas, it's sort of a weird place for us.
Right. Although y'all also help manage the natural areas.
Yeah,
And that's kind of what you're talking about. is
but like we wouldn't be able to be inviting people there to like walk around those natural areas. There would be,
purely for sort of habitat protection and preservation.
Right.
And yeah, that's a good. Pretty good thing to look at and also to sort of think about an important issue with Metro and their acquisition of those areas. The Metro Care program around that, so, yeah.
And at the very first of this project, or when we had this kind of a group invite for the public to come in, one thing that people always talked about was connecting two trails that was, I think, from George Rogers Park upwards. Did that get done as a part of this project?
it is in that project list there. It's actually a partially funded project. I guess it's almost fully funded project.
Yes.
That we're actually hoping to.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that'll end up being like hopefully early accomplishment.
Yes.
In the
I still want to put it on the list because I want to be able to. check
Yeah,
it off.
it's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Well, I saw from North Rogers south to Foothills, also from
North
Rogers.
Foot.
You're right.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like there's one little, it goes from Foothills and then you go through Roar, which
Yeah.
is really just that platform. And then it goes most of the way and we're missing like 600 feet and it would be that missing gap.
Yeah.
There's that directionally flip first.
Let's just get our shovels up.
You and I could do it together.
Is there any talk about the location of where the water treatment facility renovations we have? it was kind of a ways away, but.
Yeah, there is a project on the list under Foothills Park, I wanna say, like future park expansion. And that is looking at some point, there is a plan to relocate the existing wastewater treatment plant, kind of like right next door, basically.
Mostly gonna be passed over.
Well, so the property where it sits, it'll be, I mean, it will be a really long process, so they have to like build the new one, then decommission the old one, then probably do some environmental rehabilitation on that property where the old one has been. But then there are some kind of preliminary ideas about like, well, then what are we gonna do with that space? It's right there on the river, it's a really beautiful place. And I think for us, we're gonna be advocating for, well, we would like to expand Foothills Park to encompass more of that area, and that might be an opportunity to also accomplish some of our other like no location identified projects while we're doing that and kind of getting more land. So it's definitely not. It's going to be a long, like maybe 2020.
Yeah.
Probably not. But
That's when you're pickleball. place.
Yeah, that's what
yeah,
I'm
I mean,
saying.
that is one of the places that we talked about pickleball courts years ago.
Mm.
It's not close to any houses and.
Yeah, yeah.
It's far away, we'll just bounce it over to Milwaukee.
Exactly.
I
All right, any other, yeah, sure.
So, two other like land acquisition projects, this was mentioned in the, DEI framework that the Parks Board, approved and recommended, last week. But considering, land acquisition for, establishing a park with views of Mount Hood or Mount St. Helens. So the general public could really enjoy that. And the DEI working group that was working on that draft was talking about how it could even potentially be, a place that could be like a destination for people, like you could have weddings there, if there's like a little, platform area, and you could have a little, shelter, where you could have a reception afterwards, party, and have it, be a really nice spot, for parks and enjoying the natural view of the mountain. And then also, strategic land acquisition for expanding access to public waters. So swimming and, paddleboarding or kayaking, and then also just use of our natural waters that we're like surrounded by, but sometimes it's hard to get a good view of.
For things that we're talking about, like strategic land acquisition, that's more typically addressed in like a system-wide recommendation, because it's like a sort of a programmatic thing for us to be thinking about, is like if there's opportunistic, someone comes to us and they have land that they want to sell, which doesn't happen that often, unfortunately, or we see something go on the market and, or, whatever, then we'd say, hey, council, we want to buy this land, and we point back to, we have this adopted recommendation that that the community has told us they want us to prioritize land acquisition that has these certain characteristics, access to public waters, or use of Mount Hood, or next to an existing natural areas.
So that may be something that's sort of more appropriate, if it's not already there, is in the system-wide recommendation plan and the CIP, but I mean, I think, yeah, capturing it somewhere. All right, anything else that I'm gonna mention, one other thing, yeah.
Just curious, I didn't see it on here, but something that I was hoping would be eventually done is to continue to try Lake View, which a lot of people like live there, but some people like you, right? Where the bus barn is now, because the buses are going there, we have semis going there, we have a lot of families walking their dogs and stuff, so it really, I didn't see anything.
So stuff that's gonna be in the public right of way, it's kind of confusing. The trails and pathways that are in the public right of way, like usually that means they're adjacent to streets, although there's some, like the one along Stafford, that's ours, but most of those are managed by engineering,
Right.
the city's engineering department, and are prioritized by the Transportation Advisory Board. And so for our sort of role with those projects is when the engineering department is doing their capital improvement plan or talking about their pathways program, is to say, hey, you know, we want to advocate for trails that
The
connect people to
recommendation.
parks, or like, or we've heard from the community that this is really important, or something like that. But that is one of those that is not kind of our purview to put on our.
But we definitely talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have heard about that one.
And we did talk about those types of improvements as being important in the system-wide recommendations document as well. So I think like, but we did not go and identify
Unfortunately,
specific.
it doesn't connect to a park, it's more out of the way. You could put a park out there.
Put a park at the end.
I mean, I think we sort of advocate for those things. Yeah. Like, probably would identify a specific project.
So the expectation is that all of the things that are on this list are things that we think, or all these groups thinks should be implemented. Is this, do you see what I'm saying? Is this the plan? Or will things fall off the list?
Things may, okay, so this is the list of things that we want to see implemented. Our next step will be to prioritize these. It's like a segue to the sort of next part of this agenda. And when we prioritize them, what that's probably going to mean is the order in which these things happen, the
Right.
relative time period. Are these short-term projects? Are we trying to get this done in the next 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years? It doesn't, and then we will, again, we're in the process of identifying costs associated with these. We're almost always, I don't think I've ever worked on one of these plans where the costs did not exceed the available resources. So our job will be first to prioritize them. Well, first to add cost to them, then to prioritize them, then to identify a funding strategy to pay for them. And even then, we probably won't have an adequate, at least in place now, set of money to build them all. And so just putting them in the plan gives you the opportunity to potentially pursue them, and in some cases, make sure they get built, but it doesn't guarantee that every single thing is going to be built.
Thank you.
So I
Thank you.
think it's fair to say that, and probably remiss if we didn't. Right?
Yeah, well, and I want to share one example, because I was looking back at old plans as part of this process and thought it was really interesting that even back in the 1997 plan, there was what started out as like a sort of called a system-wide recommendation. Well, the city should really explore some sort of indoor community recreation pool center. That's a long time ago. And then, you know, the following plan had a little more sense of what that might look like. And it sort of took like multiple iterations, but now that facility is being built. And if it hadn't been included on the project list in those plans over those years, it probably would have been prioritized. But even though it's aspirational, it's still advantageous to include things that you actually think would benefit the community in the long term in a plan like this, because someone will pick it up eventually and have the resources and the staff capacity or the whatever it takes to get that thing done.
Thank you.
Yeah, if it's
Thank you.
important enough and desirable enough by the community. But again, we can't guarantee everything in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want to bring up this discussion we had before, about luxury parks, but with respect to the athletic fields that are proposed to there.
Exactly. I think I am gonna talk about that a little bit. Not
Okay.
that, but athletic.
So we should consider, I actually looked at the lamp and I looked at and I understand the issue. But one thing we could possibly consider is instead of athletic fields, like maybe some athletic facilities, and that would be like, we could even like, maybe even like a trail for running that has like exercise, something that is more kind of consistent with the luxury farm, natural. And you could still, it would still be athletic. You still, there would be even a sand volleyball court that's surrounded by like natural vegetation as opposed to, you know, two big soccer fields. So I mean, I'm just like, I think if we can think outside the box a little bit, I don't know if the bond financing, I mean, there's constraints, but possibly we can do something that kind of bridges that gap.
Well, I'll say, so first of all, for everyone who wasn't at the Parks Board meeting last week, several Parks Board members raised concerns about the project that is, there's two, in the 2013 Lusher Area Master Plan that was adopted by the city 11 years ago now, they proposed 2 additional, like, big multi-sport athletic fields, similar to what's at Hazalia, up on the hill behind Hazalia. And so we basically pulled all of the projects from the Lusher Area Master Plan into this document, because we've heard from a lot of people, hey, we want this plan to be implemented. But then we have heard, and I think that's fair, some concerns from people that, well, maybe even though that's included in the plan, that's not an appropriate place to put that type of facility, and maybe the need is already being met by the field of Hazalia and the field that's proposed at CAC. So what I'll say about that is, one, we have added some scope to our project to do an athletic field study. It's sort of a parallel mini project that's going to inform what the current demand is and what the current availability is for athletic fields. Anecdotally, I do hear a lot of folks saying kind of what you were saying about volleyball, that it's really hard to find space for kids to practice. But that's why we're doing this study, to say, is there a need for more facilities in the city, and what types? So I think part of what informs this will come from that. The other thing is that if you read that description very carefully, it does say that that's in my mind, a much longer term project, because that's not something that the city could ever implement while that area is located outside the urban growth boundary in Clackamas County, which it is currently. So there are a couple projects in that area that we can't touch until such time as there is political interest in expanding the city limits, which requires a lot of other things. We can ask about later if you really want to get into it, but it's not even
There might be a lot of concern for something that's not gonna happen for quite a while.
But I do think that if other folks share the concerns with that thing specifically, then I do want to hear that, because if everyone, feels really strongly that that's not an appropriate place for an athletic field, then that's still valid, and then maybe we don't move forward with that piece of the plan.
I do feel that.
Okay, noted.
Yeah, and we noted a couple other folks at the park board.
Yeah.
Had similar comments. Yeah.
So nothing on this spreadsheet is funded?
There are actually a couple things that are partially funded. But the way the city does their funding is we look at it biannually, and we allocate funds. And so I would say, like, a lot of the playground replacement projects are like, it's only considered funded if it's in the city's adopted biannual budget, which we only do every 2 years. And so these projects are not funded because they're not listed in our biannual budget. But for example, like deferred maintenance projects like playground replacements or bathroom replacements, those are typically paid for through the city's demolition tax. So we get that, every year, and then we use it to accomplish projects. So it's not like we literally have no money to do anything on this list. But that said, there are quite a few projects on here that we do not currently have funding for, and part of this project is to identify a strategy for how to fund things that we can do.
And there were a lot of things in the last iteration of the plan, part in 2015, that similarly were not funded and have been built. Because the city pursued a bond measure for one, the city had other funds that it generated, during those years, and many of the projects, not all, many of them were funded, including some of the bigger ticket ones because of the bond. So, and work through SEC funds, et cetera. So, but yeah, we can't say that, we just can't say all these are built. We can't say there is dedicated funding or they are in a plan where the city said we will absolutely pay for these tickets. But that doesn't mean
So to me, though, that definitely would impact how we prioritize it.
I think that, certainly for projects where we've already identified funding for us, like those are funded, we're moving forward with them. So those kind of are at the top of the list. I'll use the George Rogers Just Foot Hills Path as an example. We're gonna move forward with that one because we have funding identified and it just makes sense for us to do that. And we've done a bunch of other community engagement that has said, we really want this project to happen. I don't think that you should let these projects not being included in the city's adopted biannual budget influence whether you think they're important. Because the whole point of this plan is to say, not just like, what do we have money to do things? It's to say, what needs to be done and then how can we do it? So we want to know what your priorities are because you think that they're important for the kind of overall good of the community. And it's our job to figure out how to.
It is a good segue to the kind of next piece of this agenda, which is to talk about criteria to identify priorities. But I don't want to I want to make sure there's so good on the project for specific things.
Just a quick question. I know we talked about it in an earlier meeting. I've been here at a park board meeting about possibly exploring, talking about maintenance fees, for outer parks. Is that still?
That is still in the system-wide recommendations.
And I think when we talk about.
And we talked about expanding that holistically, not just that type of thing.
Okay.
And when we talk about our implementation and action planning, things like that, I would expect.
Well, when we talk about funding strategies, there will be more information in that related to that and other types of funding strategies.
You can shoot them down.
Yes. We'll have another opportunity. to talk about it. So yeah, let's move into this piece. We're gonna actually let you, for folks on the park board, you know this already, but you're gonna get to actually use your phones during this meeting. We're gonna ask you to use your phone instead of telling you don't use your phone. So we've identified a number of criteria which we plan to use to help prioritize items. And when we're doing this type of thing as part of a project, one of the things we can do is weight certain criteria, give certain criteria more weight than others. So we can say, well, this one we think ought to be worth twice as much as this other one, something like that. So, and so that's the thing we can do. And one of the ways that, one of the types of information we can use to weight things is to get some guidance from you all, the park board and the community, around what criteria might be most important. So here are the criteria that we have identified to date. And I'm just gonna mostly read these. I don't usually do that. I'm gonna do it this time kind of. So the project fills a gap in an area of the city where similar facilities or service areas are not currently available. So it gets to that gap, that service area and gap analysis that we did. The project addresses the needs of people or groups with specific park and recreation needs. This gets to that equity analysis work that we did. So people with disabilities, families, older residents, youth. The project meets multiple park system planning goals and objectives. So as we put together this list, we've identified what types of objectives, sort of broad goals, these projects meet. The project cost and feasibility. This is a really, I think, twisty one.
And someone didn't like
And
it.
someone didn't like it. But I'm gonna read it anyway. And this one might have scored kind of low in our score for attention. But the project cost and feasibility is scaled appropriately to the benefit it will provide. I mean, I think this is a reasonable criterion. But what we heard the Parks Board was, how are you gonna measure that? I said measure. I say measure, my wife gives me a hard time measure. My mom, Wyoming upbringing. Use my pronunciation there. Anyway, so yeah, how do you figure that out? How do you figure that? So this one would obviously take a little more, maybe a little more work to figure out how we apply it. Availability of state or federal grant funding or similar sources for implementation. So that's sort of thinking about it from an opportunistic way. Like if there's a lot of state money out there for trail connections, pathway connections, then that might kind of help us bump some of these up into the nearer term when we know the money's available. Or the project addresses one or more identified citywide goals or initiatives. So we listed a number of different types of goals here. So these are the criteria we've identified so far, which we can use to help prioritize things. As Kira said, there's some things that the city is already moving forward on, or already like basically they've identified or funding for them. Those things are likely to be noted as high priority projects because they're kind of in the queue or there's a source of funding for them. So I don't know if that's sort of noted explicitly here, but I think it's sort of important to know generally. So what we're gonna do on this next slide, we're gonna put a QR code up there, and we want you to use your phones for the Q with the and try to read that QR code off one of the screens, and it's going to take you to a website run by it's called Mentimeter, and it's going to ask you to basically list these in what you think are the sort of the priority order, and then we're going to show you the results. We did this Parks Board as well.
Should we vote again?
So we do.
You can vote
I
again.
think
What if you get modified?
I think it's okay.
I think it's, well, I told you.
Vote the opposite way that you did.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
You're making all of them or just the top?
I'll
Oh, good.
Yep, there we go.
You can kind of see the results live on the screen.
We'll get
But
it
can't
here.
you read them?
I can read them. Yes.
Man, no one is prioritizing cost and feasibility. You have to make my job really hard.
I've only got 5, is that right?
There's
Should be six.
I think somehow I deleted one.
Good time.
Send it off the screen or something.
I don't know what I did. Unranked option. Oh, here we go. Take that back.
Okay, I can't find it in the room, and I think there's.
Imagine. I can't even have a hard time reading too.
Oh, well,
So the phone picked it up and I'm like, oh my God.
QR codes make such a comeback.
I
Yeah,
know, right? It's everywhere.
like lots of things. It's
I never thought QR code.
like AI, please no more.
Yeah, that worked. Anybody still working on?
No.
Yeah, okay. No worries, good shit.
Anyone who hasn't used this before, it's actually pretty cool to do in big meetings, and it's also anonymous, so you can. If you have kind of like a contentious meeting, you can have everybody vote. And people, I think, are more likely to answer how they actually feel rather than be influenced by people around them, so. If anyone ever has a big meeting and they wanna learn.
Yeah, I like it. It also often in a big meeting, maybe you're only hearing from like 3 people. And this way you hear everybody, even the people who have access for voicing their opinion verbally. So,
We got all of them.
meet everybody?
They have a free.
Okay. So, so I'm on, Jeff and I are, whoops. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of just summarize, or not summarize, but tell you, you can hopefully see them up there, but it's probably hard to read. So, so again, this gives us the average ranking based on what y'all did. So, and I'm also, we're looking at what the park board said versus what y'all said. So I'll kind of, first I'll tell you what you said, and then I'll tell you how that compared to what the park board said. So what y'all said was, top criteria, and the top 3 are very close, right? They're like almost equal. So meets multiple park system planning goals and policies is first, and then the next 2 tied fills a gap or addresses needs of people or groups with specific park and recreation needs. Next down was top accessibility, scaled appropriately to the benefit it will provide. Below that was addresses 1 or more citywide goals or initiatives, and the last one was availability of state or federal grant funding. That one scored the lowest in both groups. It's interesting. With the park board addresses needs of people or groups with specific parks and recreation needs was the top ranked one. So not too different from y'all, because it's sort of a close second in this group. The park board did rank addresses 1 or more citywide goals or initiatives as number 2, and it showed up as number 5 in this group. So that's kind of interesting to me. And then the park board had meets multiple park system planning goals and objectives of 3, where you'll had it as kind of the number 1 group. And then fill the gap, you all ranked that one higher than the park board, added number 2, they added number 4. And then the last one, the cost and feasibility is scaled appropriately to the benefit will provide. Not too far off, like park board had that as number 4, or no, you all had it as number 4, park board had it as number 5. So, so some, similarities. And I'd say the other thing is like the top 3 here were closer than they were with the park board. And we are asking the same question basically in, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So, yeah, so that's kind of how that came out. So we're kind of asking you, we asked the park board, and then we're asking the larger community, we'll kind of ask ourselves maybe, and we'll come up with some kind of weighting of these and apply it. When we do that, it'll be a thing where we could sort of look at, well, if we weighted these differently, how might the project fare as well. So we are in the process of conducting a survey with a larger community, and one of the questions on the survey is the same question: how would you rate these criteria? We didn't ask the question in exactly the same way as you, because we find that when you're completing a survey like this, it's challenging often for people to do this kind of ranking exercise, and you can kind of get to the same results if you just say, and it's applied to a larger group of people, if you just say, tell me which 2 things are most important, because ultimately you'll get a set of rankings, and it's just easier and faster for people to answer the question in that way. So when we do online surveys, we tend to use that. We ask the question more that way than we do in the rank these 6 things in order, because it's just tougher and more time to do that. So, but we are asking the question. So, so we'll see what we hear from that. Patrick, you had a question?
Yeah, just did it, I know during the park board meeting, it hadn't already gone out yet. Has that finally gone out?
It has gone out.
Okay, did it go out to all the neighborhood HOA associations?
So what we have done so far, and then what we still have left to do is open through November 8th. So it'll be open for a few weeks. We have emailed it to basically anyone who's registered for a program before. If you guys have been part of a city program, you probably got an email from us. Brenda told me it was too long. sorry. But the survey link is in there. We put it on our social media accounts, so we have like a Instagram and a Twitter and a Nextdoor and a Facebook, and so it's out in those platforms. It's on the website. If you go to Parks and Recreation, you should see it in like the banner across the top there. I'm working on getting a button added to the Parks Plan 2040 website that makes it easy to take from there. But haven't quite figured that out yet. What we are still going to do is I email it to all of the neighborhood association like chairs. We do not keep an active list of HOA contacts. They just change all the time and there's so many of them. Usually we just go through neighborhood association. So that's my plan. And there's one more that I'm forgetting. Yes, hello. It'll be in the hello, and it's out in the lowdown, which is the Friday email that comes out from the mayor. And there will be an ad in the Lake Oswego Review. We already have 215 responses.
That's very thorough. Yeah, so.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Robin.
I was gonna say, Robin's listening,
Yeah.
thank you, Robin.
So what's interesting about the prioritization criteria here is you've listed cost in them. You know, does cost matter? But maybe what you want to do, it's too late to do that now, but take cost out and see what people think just for that. And then the bigwigs make the decision on, you know, do you have money to pay for it?
Yeah,
Because money matters.
it does. And that's why we wanted to make sure it was a criteria, because
Yeah, but
sometimes people don't want to pay for another bond measure to pay for the big project. Like that,
Right.
not like you have to like ask people like, hey, does this matter to you at all?
I was just amazed that not too many people cared about the money. And I'm over here, money.
Building on what Benny's saying, I think it's a great, you know, thing to exercise that people do, but when we're answering this, it's like, we're answering like, what's our aspiration? What do we want to see happen? But I know when we're doing, you know, sitting down on the parks board and saying, here's the pot of money from the parks bond, how are we gonna stretch these dollars to do as many as possible, then cost and feasibility become very important, and whether or not you can get matching grants or whatever becomes extremely important as well. So, I mean,
So I think like if you're a parks board and you have this list and we've provided it to you and we've prioritized it, and not that it's going to happen, everybody agrees on the priority, like the order in which we should approach implementing these projects. Maybe one year you don't do anything because you're letting your funding build up so you can accomplish something bigger because that's what's next on the list. Or maybe you direct staff to say, hey, you need to go out and find some more strategies because this project is, we don't have the money for it, but it's really important. But I mean, I think that's always how it goes. 'Cause like Matt said, you never have
Enough money to do everything.
that I'm
different.
aware of, yeah.
I mean, very.
Well, it's a 15-year plan too,
Yeah.
right?
And that's the
So,
other thing, yeah.
I mean, if we look at, you know, it's like I think of like frisbee, you know, and you still see some of those in parks. People spend so much money doing that 20 years ago, and it's such a relic.
I think it's having a relative.
I think it's actually, I think one of Lakers middle school as well. The one in 2 hours, and I can see from my office, became a dog park. Nobody heard me.
It's just a different activity.
Yeah.
It's just a different activity. We're looking more aspirational. I mean, how do you know what the cost is? Like,
You guess,
I mean,
planning level.
I know, but for example, so like, you're kind of guessing on what, you know, the state is going to prioritize things in the funding. And so, you know, okay, so do I agree with the state's funding priorities? And if I do, then maybe we should rank. I really think that the difference too between the board and this is the board has more information about what the city's priorities are, for example. So it may be somewhat kind of amorphous to the folks on this commission or advisory board, but because we have been told what they are repeatedly, the Parks Board knows has a much greater appreciation. So I think there's just with information, their priorities are going to change.
And I think what we will provide you after we prioritize things is not like literally 100, I think 124 projects in that exact order, and that's exactly how they will be accomplished, but we'll be putting them into buckets.
Yeah.
So it's like this
Nice.
near term, higher priority, tier one, whatever you want to call it, bucket, that's something that we think we should accomplish in maybe 0 to 5 years, like near term. And then we have the medium term bucket, and we have the longer term bucket. And
Some of those still might not, I mean, that's how
Some
we'll
might not be done.
prioritize them, but some still might not get done. I mean, for give you a good example of one that was in a plan 27 years ago, and it took a couple rounds of updates to the plan to get done, but it will be done. It's a really big project.
but I do think it is important to go through this exercise with you guys, the advisory committee, as well as with Parks Board, because then when the city is working on its capital improvement plan, which we do every couple of years, we have some sense of where should we be allocating our budget resources. And, you know, maybe within the near term bucket, we can only get 3 of these done and, you know, or maybe something in the midterm bucket, like breaks and has to be done much sooner than we had previously anticipated. It's not always gonna be sort of you can think of the project list as sort of a living document, I guess, like we wanna know what your priorities are, but also things could change in the next 15 years that we can't anticipate. Maybe we get a ton of funding from somewhere and we can do everything.
Thing is, sometimes it's important for cities to be opportunistic, even if folks, you know, on these two groups said, well, availability of state and federal funding is not that important, but if there's a specific project and it's like, well, it's in that list, but there's federal or state money that'll pay for that, that'll allow the city to do more things with its funds. And that can be pretty important to do. So I think, you know, sometimes that can be a pretty important criteria at a given moment. Again, to help leverage other city funds, help them go further. So, anyway. Yeah, so, but I mean, this will be important information for us as to, again, move forward and come up with this every year. So thank you for helping with that, and definitely, you know, encourage your friends, colleagues, to participate in the survey. They have not already, and great to hear 215 because we just kind of, it went live early last week, but, and even then we had mid last week. Yeah, and we hadn't sort of started getting the word out as much then, so that's great.
So I'll email both the CFD and the Parks Board this link, even though you participated in the Mentimeter exercise, you can still take the survey.
Because there's other questions on the survey.
And yeah, if anyone is willing to, you know, send it to folks who might be interested, or your friends or your boards or anything like that, that'd be great.
And then we've got one more slide for you, which is the next step.
Well, if any
Well,
more
we've got
questions.
any more questions about, yeah, any more questions or discussion? And so we kind of asked that question earlier, but yeah, anything else on the criteria or the, yeah.
One more quick question. I know we talked about getting back to, regarding pickleball. I know we had a city council member say that it is kind of a higher priority based on our last meeting. So because of that, does that mean possibly going to be fast tracked for the study next year? That's the next step, right? A study.
Yeah, the next step for that would be, well, like some sort of study or analysis of like, where does this even go? I think it's likely that I guess that's the other factor, is if there's a political will, there's a way often. If that's a council priority, also it is for many people, a community priority, and it meets multiple objectives, and that it fills a gap in our system. It's a council goal, it's been a, you know, Parks and Recreation goal to provide this variety of services. So I think it checks a lot of those boxes anyway. I'm not gonna promise we're gonna have a study done next year, but it is something that we know is.
I'm assuming it's gonna end up, if I had to guess, in the near term bucket, and it will basically say progress should be made on this, you know, in the near term.
Yeah.
Whether or not you get a facility or you get a study done next year.
Just if that's a challenge if you don't have a lot of.
That is
Like we're trying to find existing land to make this happen.
Yeah.
People aren't always liking it right next to them.
Understood.
One more very random thing that just popped
Sure.
into my brain. I didn't see, I thought we had talked about this before, maybe a long time ago. And because there's federal, or not federal, but there are grant funding for, accessible grants, for people that have in wheelchairs to be able to. have that. Did we talk about?
We did talk about that.
And I'm just
a
wondering
little
if
bit.
that made it, I just want to make sure that
I think we talked
down
about,
there, because I think it's a really cool feature, for people in the community. Age two.
Yeah.
Lots of different things.
are you talking about specifically kayaks? I can remember, we talked about the
Yeah.
rollout mats that you could put on beaches, if you could take down like a prop stand.
No, specifically for kayak.
Specifically for kayak.
Yeah, and I can get you the therapist. There's one that, I can't remember, but she does a program, so they're all our communities that would be able to utilize that. We talked about like bringing in more people. I'm gonna try to get you that.
Yeah, thank you.
Cost. That would be awesome.
All right. Anything else on this topic? The next step might give you a little bit of contact. So this is just kind of where we headed next. And I already kind of talked about this. I sort of forgot a little bit this letters in here, but I'll kind of go through it again. So again, that prioritization survey is out right now. We've had that conversation with this group and with the park board. As we said earlier, one of our next steps is to identify a set of funding strategies, as we're also identifying costs for these projects. We're working on that SBC methodology update, and without going into a lot of detail about that, I'll say that we've sort of identified some approaches to address some of the things that the city said it wants to do and how it applies SBCs to, for instance, different types of housing.
Does everyone know what SPCs are?
Yeah, I used it earlier, system development charge. So, but then I just said that before, not SBC. So
Does everyone know what system
We know that
development
is.
charges are?
No.
system development. Yeah, sorry about that. It is a fee that is applied to new growth to pay for the impacts of that new growth on the need for different types of public facilities. So typically it's paid by a developer when a developer builds something and connects to city services. And cities apply SBCs to typically parks, water facilities, wastewater facilities, transportation facilities, sometimes stormwater as well. In Lake Oswego's case, just the things I mentioned, but not stormwater. So, and SBCs can only be used to pay for a facility or a portion of facility that's necessitated by growth in population or employment. And they can be applied to both residential development housing, but also to non-residential development, to commercial or industrial development. And there's like a little SBC primer for y'all. In most communities, historically, the way SBCs are applied to housing or new residential development is by either, there's typically just been sort of two tiers, like you apply this charge, and it's one charge to any single family detached home. You apply this other, typically lower charge to any apartment unit, multi-family unit. One of the strategies that's come out of this city's housing strategy plan that's been underway for the last year or so, that I am also working on coincidentally, or whatever. And in a lot of other communities is because SBCs are meant to relate directly to sort of the impact of growth on the need for these public facilities and services, to tie the SBC not to just like these two sort of bifurcated types of housing, but to the size of the home being built potentially, which typically has a more proportionate impact to the need for these facilities. So that's one of the strategies in the city's recent housing or current housing production strategy plan that's about to go to council for adoption, is to do that. And so that's one of the things we're looking at here is, can we tie, is there a way within the methodology is the approach to how you apply the SDCs to develop. So that's one of the things we're looking at here is, can we tie the amount of the SDC a little more directly to the size of the housing unit that's being built and its impact on the need for these new facilities. So that's one thing. The other thing we need to figure out as part of this process is okay, what's the component of growth associated with these different projects in the CIP? Like how much of it is needed to support new growth? Because the SDC has to be tied to, again, new growth. So we have to sort of figure that out. And we have a specialist in SDCs on our team. So they're looking at this now. So once they see the CIP and the cost associated with it, they'll have a better sense of, giving us some options of how we do that. They've already given us some different options in terms of how we tie potentially the residential SDC to type of housing unit or size of housing unit. So those are a couple pretty key sort of methodology questions. So that's what we're doing here is we're updating both the methodology, the approach for how the SDCs are scaled and applied, and then the CIP and the growth proportion is used to figure out the amount of the fee. And then the city will also decide they're going to charge the full fee or a portion of the fee. So that changes then the SBCs that are applied, and that changes the amount of revenue that comes in via SBC, as a result of new development. So that was a lot of talking. Sorry about that. But blame Patrick because he asked. That's his fault. All right. It's okay. So we are working on that as sort of a separate component of this process. And as I said earlier, that update to the methodology will be adopted separately by the council. Yes, sir.
So does that mean the demo tax will also get updated? Because like the demo tax was established because when you knock down an old house and rebuild a bigger house, you didn't have to pay SDCs because it was just a house for a house. But if you're knocking down a 1,000 square foot house and you're building a 5,000 square foot house, there's potentially more impact on our system. So is the demo,
I think, so the demo tax isn't like a parks funding strategy. It's a city fee that we benefit from, basically. I do think there have been some conversations in this, it's managed basically by our planning and building department, who say, okay, you're applying for a demo permit, that's when we would apply this fee. But I don't think there's plans to like do away with the demolition tax.
And we're not.
like expand. So like I was wondering, like, well, if you're replacing 1,000.
There's a short answer. We're not doing that as part of this project.
Got it.
I'm not saying that we wouldn't have that be a recommendation that comes out of this, but as part of this project, we are tasked with updating the SBC methodology. We were not tasked to update the demo fee. So we are not doing that as part of this project.
And that wouldn't be parks updating that in any case.
Because that's the thing, the Parks SDC is specific to parks and it's directly with what comes out of the park plan. Because the CIP in the park plan is what drives in part the park.
But if you or other people on the board or the advisory committee are interested in the demo tax, Ivan has a really good grasp on it, and you can ask him at the next park board meeting, or if other folks are also interested, we can bring some more information about it for the next meeting and
Or send it to you.
or our email.
So, yeah, you got a nice little SBC primer there. And if you're interested in that too, we can provide more information about that process for going through. So that's another thing that's happening now. So all of those things are kind of October, November, get those things done. And then as talked about earlier, identify the kind of an annotated outline of the plan, prepare a chapter too, because really a lot of the information that's going into the plan, we've already kind of written, so. And then also prioritize the projects. So all that stuff would be the subject of the December meeting with you in the park board. And then again, update the council in January, back to you with the plan, for review in February. Generally that process, and then, adoption. Finish that, starting around March. Early March. So, make sense? Any questions on that? I know that's what I was doing. All right, sorry to, do what Patrick asked and do the SEC thing. You only get 10 minutes here.
Blame me back.
So, I always, I usually play fine, but this, yeah, what's that? Yeah, sorry. Well, I think 5 minutes, that's pretty good for an SEC project. It's a complicated topic.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate seeing you as always. And,